I would like to start off by thanking the Washington Committee and Jim Shepard for including me in the symposium. I'm very grateful to be here. I've established Fancy Work Finishing back in 1982, and prior to that I was an apprentice for 4 years with one of the Washington National Cathedral's finishers. And this is just a small collage of work that I've done here at the cathedral over the past 35 years. And the cathedral has been my home away from home for 35 years. I was here constantly when I was younger in particular. And I've actually become very chummy with the needlepoint here. So I'm going to share some intimate tidbits along with some specific details about some of the projects that I've chosen to show you today. And I have truly touched every single piece of needlepoint here in the cathedral one way or another. Whether it was working with the Altar Guild and coming up with some ideas for new needlepoint pieces or for restoration, whether it was doing the preliminary work, preparing for the pieces to newly stitched pieces is what I would do the preliminary work for, because I would just do the measuring and working up the sizes, preparing the canvases, sometimes doing a little bit more than that. I did the finishing for all the newly stitched pieces, and I've done numerous restoration projects, and also I've done a lot of in-house maintenance and repairs throughout the years. My journey with the Washington National Cathedral Altar Guild and Needlepoint Committee began in 1979. And during my apprenticeship with Junebug Enterprises, I would travel along with June in her minivan, and on Fridays in particular, and we would go to all the needlepoint shops in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, and we would drop work off and pick work up. And then we would also visit the cathedral every week, along with other churches. And I would go in with her, and when we got back to the van, I would sit in the back and write up the tickets so that when we got back to the studio, we could immediately get to work on them. Over that period of time, I ended up becoming a member, a family member of the Altar Guild here at the cathedral. And at that time, I guess it was maybe 1982, 81. June was in the process of getting out of the business, and the Altar Guild here at the cathedral supported me in starting Fancy Work Finishing. Also in that period of time, my mentors, Elizabeth Rollins and Helen Fredlin, don't know if any of you are familiar with them, but they actually became the authorities of ecclesiastical needlepoint, and they really truly embraced me when I was very young, and they had enough faith and trust in me to put me in a position where I had a lot of involvement with the needlepoint here at the cathedral. So they've meant a lot to me over the years. What I was going to start with was the history of the Needlepoint Committee, and it was the very Reverend Francis Sayer decided to start a needlepoint committee here at the cathedral because he was so inspired by the needlework in Europe that he wanted to bring some needlework here into the cathedral. So he chose 3 avid stitchers that he knew of, and then Elizabeth Rollins became a member of the committee as well. And they faced the same issue that all of the smaller churches face, which is where are we going to get the money? And they came up with 3 ideas that were very effective. One of them was they knew a lot of people that had stitched pieces that were their personal pieces. And they asked them if they would be interested in displaying them in the museum here at the cathedral for a small fee. So they got a lot of pieces collected to have an exhibit. The second way of raising some income was to charge a small donation fee for anyone who wanted to visit the museum shop. And then the third process that they put into effect was they created a contest, and they put out across the country for any artist to submit their work for a fee. And then they would choose the designs that they wanted for 8 chapels, the high altar, and the great choir. And the Bethlehem Chapel was the first chapel to have needlepoint finished and installed, and that was in 1955. And then along came the high altar rail and the great choir, which were in like the 1956, 57 timeframe. And later on, at the very end, I'll be showing a restoration project that I just completed in 2013, which were pieces that were stitched in 1956 and 57. And the children's chapel had chair kneelers that were stitched in 1956. And in 1980s, late 1980s, they were starting a newer chair kneeler project in that chapel, and they had these older pieces. And they had asked me, you know, what could we do with them, because they were just in storage at the time. And so we went around and I consulted with them as to where they had the space and, you know, where they needed needlepoint. And one of the areas that came up were the 2 front pews in the great choir. The organist was having some issues with the young boys in the front rows, being a little mischievous during their practices. So he was asking if we could go ahead and make some thicker cushions to keep them up a little higher and he could keep a better eye on them. Apparently it worked. So since these canvases were only 8 by 10, we needed to make them larger to fit into the space. So I insetted them in fabric. So I cut a hole in the center of the fabric and hand sewed the piece in. So there are 20 cushions that are still up on these 2 pews that you may see today when you're taking your tours. Let's see, where do we go? This is a series of canonical seat cushions that are up in the great choir. And I did the finishing and the measuring for these. That was back in the, let's see, early, like 1989, 1990. And canonical means is Latin for song. So in this particular verse, it's holy, 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 Lord God of hosts. And the original designer of this series was Lauren Tucker. And I don't know if any of you have heard of her, but she's a fabulous needlepoint artist. And she designed these canonicals. And then after a period of time when she was involved in the project, she needed to move away. And Val Hadley came on board and completed the last 12 designs and painted the canvases. Val Hadley was someone that I knew and I had met. And we were having a hard time finding someone to finish that project. And I had talked to her and see if she would be interested in taking it on. And at the time she said no, because she did not like working with tan canvas. And that's all we use. So I asked her if she would give some thought to it, and she called me back and said she would like to take it on. And, you know, we talked about how you apply the paint a little differently on the tan canvas than you would on the white canvas, because the tan canvas is natural. It doesn't have as much sizing on it, and the paint absorbs into the canvas threads a little easier. You also have to adjust your colors, because they show up a little differently on canvas, the color, than they would on the white. So anyway, gratefully, she went ahead and finished that project. And this is the North Cathedral bench cushion. And for this one, I did the preliminary work and preparations for this piece. It's inspired by the stained glass window that's in the south nave. You'll see it today on your tour at some point. And the stitchers of this piece were Elizabeth Rawlings and Helen Fredlin. And Val Hadley did the designs for this piece as well. This was her second project at the cathedral. And this is actually the last piece of needlepoint that Elizabeth Rawlings stitched for the cathedral. And this was the last canvas that Val Hadley ever painted, because they both passed away shortly after this project was completed. Now this was a fun piece. This is a piece, it is the bench cushion in the children's chapel. And I was asked by Bovar Elementary School here at the Cathedral to design a piece for them. They wanted to donate something for the children's chapel. And I went over and I consulted with them to get an idea of what was important to them, what they felt like they would like to have in that chapel. And so I decided to use two angels representing the stained glass window. It's the story of David and Samuel. And the chair kneelers in the children's chapel are orange. I'm not quite sure where that color came from. However, I did want to include it into this bench cushion because the altar rail kneelers are gray. They're like a grayish blue. Noah's Ark is on one of the altar rail kneelers in the children's chapel, so I incorporated some elements from Noah's Ark, which would be the grapevine. The little daisy in the center represents youth and innocence. The Ten Commandments represents the school motto. And on the front boxing, which you don't see on here because I haven't painted it in yet, is the teddy bear, which is the school's mascot. And then the other side is the school logo, which is right here. We painted that on the front left corner. This is a 13 mesh canvas, so there's 169 stitches in a square inch. And when you see the piece, you'll see it's quite large. And one of the teachers from Bovar School wanted to do the stitching, so she took that project on. And it is painted to point, so every stitch that you would take on this canvas, the paint is applied on that crossing. And here it is stitched. And here it is in place. And in this photo are the two chair kneelers. There's, if I remember correctly, I finished them back in the 80s, so I don't remember the count, but I think there is probably about 40. I'm just saying off the top of my head. But all of the little chair cushions are designs based on Noah's Ark. Some of them have two animals. Most of them are in pairs, but some of them will be individual pieces of animals, actually. Let's see. Oh, also, you have a card of a photo. I think it's the butterflies that's in your program. This is an article that I had written for the Needle Pointers back in 2008, and it's an article about the Children's Chapel. And I don't know if you have access to it. I have copies, but I'm not sure as to whether or not I'm allowed to hand any of them out. This is another project that I was asked to take on. It is a Pray-Do kneeler for the Resurrection Chapel. And the Resurrection Chapel was, the new project was started in 1996. I think it was when it was actually installed. And I did all the finishing for the kneelers. Lou Ann Vakey, who was in the visitors department here at the Cathedral, was instrumental in the designs for the chair kneelers and the Pray-Do kneelers in Resurrection Chapel. And Luann was retiring, gosh, when was this? This was a few years ago, actually not that long ago. I don't know, maybe 3-4 years. She was retiring, and the visitors department wanted to have a piece of needlepoint created in honor of Luann's time here at the Cathedral. So I took some of the design elements from the Resurrection Chapel, and this is a cartoon. It's a hand drawing that I submitted for approval. The peacock represents immortality. The butterflies are another significant design symbol for resurrection. The Alpha and Omega with the crown is used in another Pray-Do kneeler in that chapel. And then the pomegranate is also a symbol for resurrection. And this is a stitched canvas. It's painted to point. And at that time, I think Pattern Ann was still in business, so that was the wool that we had used. We've switched over to Appleton now. I brought the piece, before I gave it to the stitcher, to an event here at the cathedral. I did a presentation here, and I set up a floor stand and had this piece on display. And under my supervision, anyone who wanted to take a stitch in the canvas, they were able to do before they went on to their next event that day. So I would go ahead and hold a needle in place. I'd hold a needle in place, and we worked on this little part of a peacock feather. And today, I still get calls from the people that took the stitch telling me how much it means to them when they bring family members by. They can claim that they took a stitch in this canvas. And here is the finished kneeler. And you'll see it if you're in Resurrection Chapel today. It is on one of the pray-do benches. And here are the set of 48 chair kneelers that we worked on. One thing, when we would do newer projects at the cathedral, and usually on the smaller churches, the individual churches, the stitchers are allowed to put their initials, a date, and a memorial on the kneelers and cushions. Here at the cathedral, you are not, because they are made specifically for the cathedral and in honor of God. So this particular group of ladies, I'm not going to say who they are or what pieces they are, but they disclosed to me afterwards that they stuck their initials within the designs on some of these. I'm telling on them now because they can't get in trouble for it. And this is the latest project here. There were 26 diocesan cushions up in the great choir. And the canvases were stitched on Penelope, and they were stitched starting in the 1956. So we were working with pieces that were from 1956, 57, 58. And some of them were damaged, so to the point where we really had to replace them. And the rest of them, I went ahead and used the same concept as I did with the old children's chapel, cushions, which is insetting them. So here's the picture of the North Carolina diocesan seal. You can see right here how worn the canvas is all across the front. And to replace these individually, starting with new pieces, would take years, and it would be a costly project. So we decided to go ahead and inset them. So here's one that's finished. And you can see there's no seams on the fabric. The piece that's cut, the hole is cut in the center, and I go ahead and hand sew these pieces of needlepoint in the center. There's 38 steps involved in putting one piece together, from the disassembling, the cleaning, any minor repairs, preparing the materials, all the handwork that's involved in it. And the only part that's machine done is when I'm sewing the sides, the boxing, attaching it to the top surface. That's the only machine work. And here is a photo of one of two that we actually had to replace. So this is all worn and torn in here, and up in here. So instead of putting, with the Penelope, it's a little hard to do a restoration that you would want to go ahead and use it again because it's such a delicate fiber. So we went ahead and duplicated, and with some modifications, this crest on a new canvas. And this is painted to point. Actually, I think Nancy Hussey stitched this one. Yes. Mm-hmm. She's here today. And here it is, stitched and finished into the new cushion. And I don't think I have time during the workshop for the restoration and care of existing needlepoint. I will get into more detail about restoration, show you some pretty gory photos of what an inside of an old kneeler can look like. So this is a job for the War Memorial. And the original pieces were given to the cathedral by a group of British women to thank, in honor of all of the assistance that the United States gave Europe during the war. And these were all done on Penelope, and they were starting to rip, and there was a lot of wear and tear. So back in the 90s, we decided to go ahead and start a new project. Now, this is one that I hand painted, and this is another one that was hand painted, but we originally started out putting them together as graphs. So we generated computer graph designs and then pulled the wool, and I drew the dimensions on the canvas, and that's what was handed out to the stitchers. Well, working by graph ended up not being very successful, so I started to hand paint the canvases from that point on. So all of the needlepoint you see in the War Memorial Chapel right now are new pieces, but they are exact duplicates of the originals. Also, the original ones, I don't have a photo of it in here, but the chair nailers were damaged so badly. There's a lot of tears. I'll have one as an exhibit during the workshop. And I didn't want them all to just be put aside and put into archives. So I took a selected few, I cleaned them, blocked them, and then I attached them to brand new raw canvas and hand sewed them on top of the canvas and made them into wall hangings. So some of the offices are displaying them today, and there will be one, I think there might be one in the exhibit, and then I'll also have one in the workshop for you to see. And here is a newly finished kneeler, and here's a finished altar rail kneeler. And this is the high altar. Back in the late 80s, I was asked to restore them. At that time, they were one long continuous piece on the right side and the left side. And the design was sort of like a runoff from one to the other. So the only way, and they wanted me to break them up into 5 individual pieces. And the only way to do that would be to center the crown in each of the individual kneelers, and everything else would just end up where it was. After another 10, 15 years of use, this is what started to happen. People during tours would put their feet up on the edge. So this is raw canvas and even down to the rubber in some spots. So I was asked to go ahead and do a duplicate and translate these onto new canvas. And this is just a display of the old one. Here is our process of pulling and packaging the wool. Here is one of the pieces stitched. And what I did is I did do some modifications to make the design complete on each individual kneeler. Oh, this is us working on the high altar rail rock. This was one of the, I restored it twice actually, and this was the second time. And it's already clean, blocked, and backed, but what we're doing here is we're hand sewing the rod pockets on the back of the the rug. And on my website, the first photo on About Us is myself and one of my workers were installing the rug. And here it is after it was put in place. There is a piece that's down here on the floor. It's 9 foot by 9 foot, and I separated it. This is a seam where it was joined, and I separated it because it was being walked on to the point where it was starting to get damaged. So it's separated, and it can come out during special occasions and be put down in place.
Is that one piece?
It is not. The whole rug, it's 22 pieces, individual pieces. And the designers were the Tibbet sisters. I think they were in Pittsburgh. And this rug was originally designed, and I think it was, well, it would have been in 1959. Oh, this was fun. The museum shop several years ago asked me to do some pieces that they could sell as kits in the museum shop. So this is a ceiling. These are ceilings in the north and the south entrance of the cathedral. And if you look up, you'll see the designs. And so these were little bookmarks that we painted and kitted, and they were sold and they were available in the museum shop several years ago. But that just goes to show you that you can take anything and create a piece of needlepoint out of it. And with that, I hope all of you have a fabulous day today and that you find a lot of peace and are inspired during your time here at the cathedral.